Welcome to a conversation that we desperately need to have, but rarely do with the nuance it deserves. I'm your host, Zoya Sinclair, and today we're diving deep into one of the most profound, yet under-examined cultural shifts of our time. How pornography has fundamentally rewired an entire generation's understanding of sex, relationships, and power, with your favorite podcast channel, Sexual Chemistry. Relax, this isn't your typical moral panic podcast. We're not here to clutch pearls or make simplistic judgments. Instead, we're going to examine the data, explore the complex realities, and ask the hard questions that matter. Because here's the thing. Whether we talk about it or not, pornography is already talking to us, and it's been having a very long, very detailed conversation with millions of young people for over 2 decades now. Interested in discussing more like this? Check out Scoob, an AI-powered podcast studio app that gives you insights from all around the world on topics like intimacy, psychology, emotions, spirituality, and more, for free. So what are you waiting for? Download the app now from the App Store or Play Store and get started. Let's start with some numbers that should make us all pause. By 2018, just the top 5 pornography websites, Pornhub, Xvideos, BongaCams, Xmaster, and XNXX, were collectively receiving over 6 billion visits monthly. To put that in perspective, Pornhub alone reported 28.5 billion visits in 2017. That's roughly 78 million visits per day, every single day of the year. But here's what really matters. This isn't just adult consumption we're talking about. A 2012 University of Sydney study found that 43% of regular porn users had started watching between the ages of 11 and 13. Another study from Alberta, Canada, revealed that 90% of boys aged 13 to 14 had accessed sexually explicit media, with 35% admitting they'd watched porn too many times to count. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about children whose first introduction to sexuality isn't through awkward conversations with parents, fumbling teenage experimentation, or even basic sex education. It's through high-definition, professionally produced content designed to maximize arousal in adult consumers. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we need to travel back in time. Not too far, just to before the internet changed everything. Historically, pornography was a completely different beast. We're talking about still images, Polaroids of sexual acts, black and white photos of seductively posed individuals, illustrated guides like the Kama Sutra. Here's what's fascinating about this earlier era. These static images required something that modern porn has essentially eliminated: imagination. When you had only a photograph, your mind had to animate the scene, create the narrative, fill in the blanks. Your fantasy life was active, creative, personal. You were the director of your own erotic imagination. Fast forward to today, and we've created something unprecedented in human history: instant access to an infinite library of high-definition sexual content, searchable by any conceivable category or fantasy. You can type a specific scenario into a search bar and watch it unfold in vivid detail within seconds. The imagination that once filled the gaps? It's been outsourced to professional producers who understand exactly which buttons to push for maximum arousal. But here's where it gets really interesting and concerning. Modern porn doesn't just show you sex, it categorizes it, packages it, and presents it as a fully formed reality. Whether it's teen, gangbang, MILF, or stepdaughter, categories that would have been unimaginable in earlier eras, each comes with its own implicit rules, power dynamics, and expectations. Now let's talk about what the research actually shows, because this is where things get uncomfortable for everyone involved in this debate. A 2010 meta-analysis found a significant overall correlation between pornography consumption and attitudes that support violence against women. This relationship was stronger with violent pornography, but even non-violent content showed statistically significant associations. But here's where the definitional problems begin. What exactly constitutes violent pornography? Is it violent when a man smacks a woman during intercourse? What about when he calls her derogatory names, ejaculates on her face, or tells her she enjoys rough treatment? What about scenarios where a woman's initial no becomes a coerced yes? The research shows that men who frequently watch pornography tend to be less supportive of affirmative action for women and show reduced empathy for rape victims. They're also statistically more likely to express intent to commit rape and to engage in sexual assault, Meanwhile, studies of women who consume pornography found they were less likely to intervene when witnessing other women being sexually assaulted. Now, critics rightfully point out that correlation doesn't equal causation. Maybe men inclined toward sexual violence are simply more likely to consume pornography in the first place. But here's what's harder to dismiss. We're conducting a massive, uncontrolled experiment on human sexuality, and we're using children as test subjects. Here's something that should fundamentally change how we think about this issue. We're now dealing with the first generation in human history to navigate their sexual development in a landscape of ubiquitous digital pornography. For most young men today, their first sexual encounter likely occurred alone in front of a screen, whether they sought it out or stumbled upon it. For young women, their initial sexual experiences are indirectly shaped by partners whose understanding of sex was formed through pornography. This creates something unprecedented, a generation for whom sex comes pre-scripted. Unlike previous generations who might have furtively shared physical magazines or videos, today's young people encounter sex as a fully categorized phenomenon, instantly accessible and seemingly real. Lisa Ann, a prominent figure in pornography, noticed this gift firsthand. In the 1990s, she was only recognized by adults. Today, she reports that 12 to 14-year-olds approach her with inappropriate propositions influenced by unrealistic scenarios they've seen online. She finds herself in the strange position of having to explain to children that what they're seeing isn't representative of real sexual experiences. This brings me to one of the most powerful illustrations of this generational shift. When teaching feminist theory courses that include discussions of pornography, professors initially expected students to dismiss anti-pornography arguments as prudish or outdated. Instead, something remarkable happened. When asked whether pornography does more than merely depict women's subordination, whether it actually creates and reinforces it, students overwhelmingly agreed. When questioned about whether porn silences women and makes it harder for them to oppose unwanted sexual advances, they said yes. When asked if it contributes to objectification and sexual violence, they responded affirmatively in unison. Remarkably, it wasn't just female students voicing these concerns. Male students often responded with even greater emphasis, expressing frustration about sexual routines they felt obligated to perform. One student asked whether it was unrealistic to envision sexual experiences that prioritize love and mutual satisfaction rather than domination and submission. Female students discussed how typical pornographic scripts neglect women's pleasure and reflected on whether this absence influenced their personal sexual experiences. One woman raised a particularly poignant question. Without pornography, where would we have learned about sex? This question cuts to the heart of a massive systemic failure. Only 25% of young Britons report having received satisfactory sex education. Only 41% of British teachers feel they have adequate training to teach about sex. In the United States, only 30 states mandate sex education at all, and 26 of those require that abstinence be emphasized. This creates a perfect storm: comprehensive, easily accessible sexual content from pornography on one side, and inadequate, shame-based, or completely absent formal sex education on the other. Guess which one wins? But here's the deeper problem. Even when we improve sex education, we're fighting an uphill battle. If education encompasses all the words, images, signs, and messages we're exposed to from birth, as Plato conceptualized it, then pornography is already providing a very comprehensive sex education. It's just not the kind most of us would choose for our children. The challenge is that pornography operates on a completely different level than traditional education. Formal sex education appeals to rational thought, encourages questions, and aims to inform. Pornography bypasses intellectual engagement entirely, creating deep psychological associations between arousal and specific stimuli. These connections are reinforced through repetition and operate below the level of conscious analysis. To understand how pornography achieves this psychological conditioning, we need to examine how it's constructed. Pornography isn't just documenting sexual acts, it's meticulously crafted to sexually arouse the viewer through specific visual techniques. The camera work reveals everything about the intended audience. The male actor's face rarely appears on screen, if at all. Instead, the camera adopts the male viewer's perspective, positioning him as the unseen protagonist. The male body is depicted as dynamic and action-oriented, the driving force behind the narrative. The most significant screen time is dedicated to the erect penis, which serves as a symbolic representation of the viewer's own anatomy, albeit idealized to be larger and more powerful. Meanwhile, mainstream pornography showcases the female body with an almost anatomical focus on orifices, mouth, vagina, and anus, all primed for penetration. But beyond this physical emphasis, pornography offers deeper psychological pleasures rooted in ego identification. It typically portrays women as voracious for male sexual dominance, assigning viewers a specific role in this power dynamic. This visual logic compels viewers to identify with the male actor, experiencing the scenario as if they were the dominant participant. The film's climax, literally, comes with the male actor's ejaculation, often directed onto the female body. With digital platforms offering pause, rewind, and replay options, viewers can synchronize their own climax with the film's, heightening the fantasy that it's their actions on screen. Now here's where things get complicated. About 32% of pornography consumers are women. This statistic is often used to argue that porn's effects can't be as universally negative as critics suggest. But what does this actually tell us about women's experiences? Female viewers face a complex set of identification choices. They might relate to the women on screen, whose pleasure is typically presented through male desire and satisfaction, reinforced by dynamics of dominance. In this scenario, female viewers might vicariously experience being dominated. Alternatively, women can identify with the male figures, temporarily adopting the role of the dominator rather than the dominated. This gender role reversal in identification might actually be quite prevalent. The female viewer's ability to oscillate between male agent and female object creates a potent form of psychological role-playing that some women find empowering, regardless of their personal sexual experiences or trauma histories. But this raises uncomfortable questions. Why might women need to adopt a masculine role to feel powerful? Why do some viewers need to watch depictions of their own demographic subjugation to feel desirable? These patterns suggest that pornography's empowerment might actually be a form of adaptation to existing power structures rather than a genuine challenge to them. The rubber meets the road when we examine how pornographic scripts translate into real-world sexual experiences. Students report feeling obligated to perform specific sexual routines derived from pornography. One young woman revealed that her ex-boyfriend persistently criticized her sexual performance, demanding that she emulate the women he saw in pornography, something she felt incapable of achieving, ultimately leading to their breakup. This isn't an isolated incident. Research shows a clear pattern. Girls who receive abstinence-only education are more likely to have sexual experiences with significantly older partners, and are more likely to describe their first sexual encounter as unwanted. Meanwhile, young women today report that boys who seem nice online often become sexually aggressive in person. The expectations have shifted dramatically. As one 17-year-old girl softly voiced during an interview, pornography has led boys to hold unrealistic expectations about girls, as if the fact that you were no longer a virgin was all the consent they needed. This brings us to one of pornography's most insidious effects, the systematic objectification of women that extends far beyond sexual contexts. We're constantly exposed to media portrayals of women designed to attract and please men. While pornography represents the most explicit version of this, the pattern pervades advertising, entertainment, and social media. Research indicates that these pervasive images compel girls and women to perpetually evaluate their appearance through others' eyes rather than focusing on their own sexual wants and needs. This shifts women's primary concern to being sexually desirable to others, placing emphasis on physical appearance over personal feelings and desires. The psychological consequences are profound. Some women internalize the belief that their primary role is to provide pleasure to men, leading them to measure sexual satisfaction by their partner's response rather than their own. The common refrain, "If it was good for him, it was good for me," represents a complete inversion of sexual agency. These same media portrayals contribute to widespread body dissatisfaction among women. A woman who feels uncomfortable with her naked body is unlikely to feel liberated during sexual experiences. It's nearly impossible to fully enjoy intimacy while focused on maintaining poses that appear attractive rather than feel pleasurable. This objectification helps explain one of the most stark inequalities in modern sexuality: the orgasm gap. Research consistently shows that women are significantly less likely to orgasm than men, particularly in casual sexual encounters. But this gap isn't biological, it's cultural and educational. The issues are interconnected. Ambivalent feelings about sex due to danger-focused education, stronger emphasis on pleasing partners over personal needs, body insecurities, and poor sexual communication skills. These factors substantially explain why the orgasm gap is most pronounced during first-time encounters and gradually diminishes with relationship sex and increased familiarity. Men's paths to orgasm are generally straightforward and similar across individuals. Women's requirements vary significantly, both between different women and from one encounter to the next. Effective sexual communication is crucial for female pleasure, but it's notably absent from both traditional sex education and pornographic scripts. Despite these challenges, there are signs of growing awareness and resistance. Young women today have access to feminist concepts and language that previous generations lacked. They can identify slut-shaming, victim-blaming, and rape culture in ways that weren't possible before. They're more likely to call themselves feminists without shame. Yet there's a troubling tension between this heightened feminist consciousness and seemingly deteriorating sexual conditions. Increased objectification, more intense body expectations, decreasing pleasure, and fewer opportunities for sex on women's own terms. This raises a critical question. Is the discourse of sexual empowerment and autonomy hiding a grimmer reality? Some young women claim to feel powerful performing unreciprocated sexual acts, describing the ability to arouse someone and then choose to walk away as a form of control. But this notion of power appears deeply conflicted and problematic. Students themselves recognize that education is part of the solution, but they understand its limitations. They attribute pornography's significant influence on their lives to inadequate sex education, arguing that porn fills an information vacuum that schools and families have failed to address. However, expanding sex education faces enormous challenges. If teachers resemble the general population, many of them, especially men, consume pornography themselves. This raises questions about whether educators can effectively challenge pornographic scripts without extensive training that confronts patriarchal constructs of sexuality. Unlike pornography, formal sex education operates through verbal communication designed to inform and persuade through rational thought. It encourages deliberation, questions, and understanding. But this approach doesn't confront pornography on its own terms. Pornography doesn't aim to inform or debate. It creates deep psychological associations that bypass intellectual engagement entirely. This isn't just a Western phenomenon. Data from 2011 to 2016 revealed that only 36% of men and 30% of women aged 15 to 24 globally understood HIV prevention. This underscores the urgent need for comprehensive sex education worldwide, but it also highlights the scale of the challenge we're facing. Meanwhile, pornography consumption continues to grow globally, with high-speed internet access expanding its reach into previously disconnected regions. We're essentially running a massive, uncontrolled experiment on human sexuality across cultures and continents. The content that dominates these platforms tells us something important about consumer preferences. In 2016, analysis of top pornography searches revealed that men were particularly interested in keywords like stepmom, stepsister, teen, and various racial categories. Women's searches focused on different power dynamics, including stepdad and daughter scenarios and group encounters. These patterns suggest that pornography isn't just reflecting existing desires, it's actively shaping and categorizing them, creating markets for scenarios that might never have occurred to people in pre-digital eras. The feminist response to pornography has been notably complex and sometimes contradictory. Early anti-pornography feminists predicted many of the outcomes we're seeing today. That pornography wouldn't just depict women's subordination, but would actively create and reinforce it. Catherine McKinnon argued that consumers would eventually want to live out the pornography further in 3 dimensions, potentially becoming incapable of viewing women as equals. She pointed to concerning examples: teachers failing to regard female students with respect, doctors engaging in unethical behavior toward women, and consumers translating their viewing habits into domestic violence, sexual harassment, and more severe crimes. Today's students, remarkably, often agree with these earlier feminist analyses. They see direct connections between pornography consumption and problematic male behavior toward women. Yet they also resist simplistic solutions, recognizing that the issue is embedded in broader cultural and educational failures. So where does this leave us? The reality is that pornography isn't going anywhere. The technology that enables instant access to infinite sexual content is here to stay, and consumption will likely continue growing as internet access expands globally. The question isn't whether we can return to some pre-digital sexual innocence. We can't. Instead, we need to ask, how do we help young people navigate a world where their first sexual education comes from content designed to maximize arousal rather than promote healthy relationships? The answer requires multiple approaches. We need comprehensive, evidence-based sex education that doesn't shy away from discussing pornography explicitly. We need media literacy that helps young people understand how pornographic content is constructed and why. We need honest conversations about consent, communication, and mutual pleasure that acknowledge the realities of contemporary sexual culture. Most importantly, we need to recognize that this isn't just about individual choices or personal responsibility. We're dealing with systemic issues that require systemic solutions: educational reform, cultural change, and possibly regulatory approaches that prioritize child protection over industry profits. Those of us who grew up before internet pornography became ubiquitous have a particular responsibility here. We can't pretend that today's young people are navigating the same sexual landscape we did. The rules have changed, the scripts have been rewritten, and the stakes are higher than ever. We need to listen to young people's experiences without judgment while also providing the historical context and analytical tools they need to understand their situation. This means moving beyond moral panic or libertarian dismissal to engage with the complex realities of how pornography shapes consciousness, relationships, and society. The students who recognize pornography's influence on their lives aren't prudes or victims. They're astute observers of their own cultural moment. They understand that they're living through a historical transition whose full implications we're only beginning to grasp. As we wrap up today's exploration, it's worth remembering that we're still in the early stages of understanding pornography's long-term cultural effects. The first generation to grow up with ubiquitous internet access is only now reaching full adulthood. The data we have, while concerning, represents just the beginning of a much longer story. What's clear is that we can't afford to continue treating this as a niche issue or a moral question divorced from broader social concerns. Pornography has become one of the primary ways that young people learn about sex, power, and relationships. Whether we acknowledge it or not, it's already reshaping our culture in profound ways. The question isn't whether pornography is inherently good or bad. It's how we collectively respond to its unprecedented influence. Do we continue pretending it doesn't matter, leaving young people to navigate its effects alone? Or do we take seriously our responsibility to help them understand and critically engage with the sexual culture they've inherited? The choice is ours, but time is running out. A new generation is coming of age, and they deserve better than our silence or simplistic moralizing. They deserve honest conversations, comprehensive education, and adults who take their experiences seriously. That's our challenge, and it's one we can't afford to avoid much longer. I'm your host, Zoya Sinclair, and thank you for joining me for this deep dive into one of our culture's most important yet underexplored topics with the sexual chemistry. If this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to continue learning, questioning, and engaging with these issues. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel on your favorite platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you're curious to know more about intimacy and beyond, check out Scoob. This AI-powered podcast studio offers over 1,000 podcasts on topics ranging from intimacy to mystery, true crime to history, and spirituality to science. Download now and enter the community of over 50,000 plus listeners worldwide, for free. Until next time, keep thinking critically about the world we're creating and the one we're leaving behind. See you on the next one.